starry skies above. Don't fence me in. Let me ride through the wide open country that I love. Don't fence.
When the Emperor Was Divine by Julie Otsuka. Chapter titled Train. Later that evening, the girl awoke to the sound of breaking glass. Someone had thrown a brick through a window, but the gas lamps were broken and it was too dark to see. She was sweating and her throat was dry and sore, and she wanted a glass of cold milk, but she could not remember where she was. At first she thought she was in her yellow bedroom in the white stucco house in Berkeley, but she could not see the shadow of the elm tree on the yellow wall, or even the yellow wall itself, so she knew she was not there. She was back at the stalls at Tanforan. But at Tanforan there were gnats and fleas and the awful smell of the horses and the sound of the neighbors on either side fighting until late in the night. At Tanforan the partitions between the stalls did not reach all the way up to the ceiling, and it was impossible to sleep. The girl had slept. Just now she had slept. She had slept and dreamed about her father again, so she knew she was not at Tanforan either. She called out for her mother. Her mother reached out from her seat on the suitcase and put her hand on the girl's forehead and smoothed back her wet hair and said, "Hush, baby." And the girl, who still could not remember where she was, remembered that her mother had not called her baby for a long time, not since the summer White Dog had run away and not come home for a week. This was before White Dog had grown old and tired and hurt his leg on the lawnmower. This was when White Dog was still a noisy white dog and would bark at anything, no matter how big that thing was. This was when the girl was still 8 and her father had let her walk alone to the corner store on a Sunday with a handful of pennies while he stood on the front porch and watched. She'd come home with a fat copy of the San Francisco Chronicle, and they had sat in the kitchen drinking large glasses of steaming hot cocoa and reading the comics, first Dick Tracy and Moon Mullins, and then her favorite, Invisible Scarlet O'Neil. And nobody else in the house had been awake. Now she was 11 and she could not remember where she was. It was late at night and her mother was calling her baby and asking her if she was all right. "Of course I'm all right," said the girl. "I just want a glass of milk." She reached out in the darkness and ran her fingers along the smooth siding of the train. "Where's White Dog?" "We couldn't take him with us." "Where is he?" "We left him at home. We're on the train." The girl sat up in her seat and grasped her mother's hand. "I dreamed about Papa," she said. "He was wearing his fancy French shoes, and we were in a boat going to Paris, and he was singing that song again." She began to hum because she could not remember the words. "In the mood," her mother said. "Yes, that's it, in the mood." "What kind of boat was it?" the boy whispered. "A gondola." "Then you were in Venice." "All right," said the girl. "Let's just say that I was." She pulled back the shade and looked out into the black Nevada night and saw a herd of wild mustangs galloping across the desert. The sky was lit up by the moon, and the dark bodies of the horses were drifting and turning in the moonlight, and wherever they went they left behind great billowing clouds of dust as proof of their passage. The girl lifted the shade and pulled her brother to the window and pressed his face gently to the glass, and when he saw the mustangs and their long legs and their flying manes and their sleek brown coats, he let out a low moan that sounded like a cry of pain, but was not. He watched the horses as they galloped towards the mountains, and he said very softly, "They're going away." Then a soldier with a flashlight and a broom came walking down the aisle. The girl let the shade fall back against the glass and told the boy to return to his seat. "Where's that brick?" asked the soldier. "Over here," someone answered. The girl sat quietly listening to the soldier sweeping up the shards of broken glass. "Shades down," she said to herself. "Shades down." Then she closed her eyes and she slept. Sometime during the night the train entered Utah. It crossed the barren stretch of the Great Salt Lake Desert and then the Great Salt Lake itself. The lake was dark and shallow and had no outlet to the sea. It was what it had always been, an ancient body of water where nothing ever sank, but the girl did not see it. She was sound asleep, but even in her sleep the sound of the rippling water came to her. An hour later the train stopped at the station in Ogden for water and ice, and the girl, who who was thirsty, still slept. She slept through Bountiful and Salt Lake City and Spanish Fork and did not open her eyes until the train arrived at Delta the next morning. When she woke, she did not remember the sound of the rippling water, but it was with her, without her knowing. The sound of the lake was inside her. At Delta, armed soldiers with bayonets escorted them off the train, and the girl climbed down the metal stairs, one by one, with her suitcase and stepped out onto the solid ground. The air was still warm, and she could no longer hear the low moan of the engine or the clicking of the wheels against the iron rails. She covered her eyes with her hand and said, "It's too bright." "It is unbearably bright," said her mother. "Keep walking, please," said a soldier. The boy said he was too tired to walk. His mother put down her bags and reached into her purse and gave him a piece of Chiclet's gum she had been saving for weeks. He popped it into his mouth, and then he followed his mother and sister between the double row of soldiers to the buses that had been waiting for them to arrive since before dawn. They climbed onto a bus, and the bus drove slowly down the shady streets of the town. They passed a courthouse and a hardware store and a diner full of hungry men eating breakfast before work. They ran through a yellow light and swerved to avoid hitting a stray dog. They passed block after block of white houses with wooden porches and neatly manicured lawns, and then they were at the edge of town. For several miles they drove past nothing but farms and alfalfa fields, and the scenery was very pleasant. Then the bus turned onto a newly tarred road and drove in a straight line past the occasional clumps of greasewood and sage until it arrived at Topaz. At Topaz the bus stopped. The girl looked out the window and saw hundreds of tar paper barracks sitting beneath the hot sun. She saw the telephone poles and the barbed wire fences. She saw soldiers, and everything she saw as through a cloud of fine white dust that had once been on the bed of an ancient salt lake. The boy began to cough, and the girl untied her scarf and shoved it into his hand and told him to hold it over his nose and mouth. He pressed the scarf over his face and took the girl's hand, and together they stepped out of the bus and into the blinding white glare of the desert.
Land, lots of land under starry skies above. Don't fence me in. Let me ride through the wide open country that I love. Don't